So, welcome to episode 25. Star Wars only had 9. We're up to 25, and this is going to be a power-packed, exemplary one. You don't want to miss any minute of it or any second of it. So, we have Maxime Jean-Louis with us today from Contact North in Canada. Oh, Canada.
Yes.
And I think I met him maybe 15, 20 years ago, maybe longer, in Toronto. And he's been not only a director, a president, CEO of many initiatives that Contact North has been promoted and been involved with in Ontario. But before that, he was part of Athabasca University. So he fully knows about the stage of openness that we're into today and the need for open education and flexible learning and online learning and blended learning. In fact, they just put out a huge report, which will be a small report, which we'll talk about, and you can get a free copy of. So maybe we can post it somewhere on at the Silver Lining for Learning site. So Maxime, that's a brief introduction. We could go longer, but there's so much we have to cover to address, and that you're going to want to talk about. We want to talk about. So I want to just start with, can you give us a sense of your history in all this, briefly stated, because it could go for an hour, and what this historical moment is like, given your 30, 25 years in the field? What is this like for you? How is this different? How has this changed your perception of what's possible and other people's perceptions of what's possible? Can you tell the audience and the people who will watch the show later what got us to this point?
There is one line that flows through, if you like, my history, which is access, equity of access. Access for those who are disenfranchised, for those who are disadvantaged, for those who are underserved. And when I studied at Athabasca University in Alberta, that is, we were focusing almost exclusively at that time on those who could not attend the other 4 major campus-based universities. And therefore, we wanted to have some means by which those in rural, remote Alberta can access education and training that lead to jobs. And I've been very fortunate because when I joined Contact North, that is, I was precisely what I was brought to do, which was to make sure that in those 4 million Ontarians who do not have access to a university or a college close by, they could also do so through online learning, which they have been. So I've been static in a way, but in a good way.
In a very good way. Can you give us an example of one project or initiative that you started at Contact North when you got there, that's been a big hit, that's been very successful and over time, sustainable and successful?
Yes, when I joined Athabasca University, we were very much in what I would call a responsive mode. We had a few centers in the north, and where people could come in and ask us whether they could help them with access to the internet or help with registering in programs and courses from the universities and colleges, we would do so. What I did do about 15 years ago, Kurt, is that I changed that mode to make it into a recruitment machine. I said to us, we have 600, in fact now 800 small and remote communities. Our job is to fan out and in a very proactive way, go out and find the first career learners, those who are disadvantaged, and bring them to take courses and programs. So we've switched. We are a recruitment machine, and in those remote communities. That has been, in my view, my greatest satisfaction, if you like.
Now, you've almost I don't know, doubled, or you've added to the people working, the staff working at Contact North. How large is it now? And
Well, it is large and it isn't. It is large in the sense that we have about 116 centers that cover about 800 communities. Now, let me give you a bit of a sense. The area we cover is bigger than France and Germany put together. Or to put it another way, it's bigger than Germany, Spain, and the UK put together. So it is not small. And so the size of it is that we are a network. We are in 800 communities. We have 116 centers, and we have to reopen them now because we can imagine with COVID-19, we had all of our centers on temporary shutdown and we're operating virtually. And we have about 300 employees dispersed throughout those 116 centers. Totally decentralized in that sense.
you also contact experts inside your staff. You bring in people to offer more services than you ever had before, from what I can tell in exploring. So it's multifaceted in terms
Yes.
of, yeah.
So if you like, that is the thing that I find most exciting in terms of what we do. There are about 22 universities and 24 colleges in Ontario. So rather than have each one of them going out to those 600 communities or 800 small communities to recruit students, they use us. So it's a shared service. So picture 22 universities, 24 colleges, they have one recruitment arm and one support service arm in all those small communities, and we are it. So we have lots of bosses.
Is that same and true in Alberta and Manitoba and British Columbia, or is this unique? Is Contact North unique to Canada?
We are in fact unique. We came up not because of if you like a well-developed policy. It was really in 1986, a premier decided, well, we should look after the North. What about if we set up an experiment? And the experiment now has become if you like, organization which has been in operation since 1986, doing what I just said that we do.
Punya wants to jump in on this.
Sure, thank you. Maxime, as I was looking over the website and looking over some of the work that you do, and I just loved that thread that you spoke about that has stayed constant through your career, which is this idea of equity of access. And with these centers in 800 different communities, clearly, and as I was looking at sort of the website and so on, you're working with remote, you're working with rural communities, Aboriginal communities, Francophone. I just want to understand how the organization sort of customizes, because clearly the needs of each of these is going to be different. The sort of constraints within which you're working are going to be different. So how does that play out across these different contexts?
This is an excellent opportunity to give you the diversity. For example, we are working in 28 First Nations communities. We are talking about communities where you can only get access in some of them by air. They are flying communities. And in the winter, you use the winter road to get to them. Example, one of those communities is actually the world's capital for suicide. The number of suicides in that community is horrendous. These are the kind of communities where we work in, because we feel that this is where, in fact, access to education and training becomes so important. So you go from First Nations communities to communities that are semi-rural, where, in fact, we have people who are, quote, unemployed, people who are on social assistance. And again, we are trying to get them into education and training via online learning so they can, if you like, get into the employment stream. We also have other areas where, in fact, it's a question of flexibility. Those students are, if you like, well-motivated. They went through high school. They would like to go on, but they do not want to leave their communities to go to a bigger center. They want to stay close to their area. So we are fighting, and having government fight the rural exodus. So we are part of an economic, if you like, strategy to say, don't all move to Toronto or to Ottawa or to London or to Windsor. Stay in those communities where you are and grow them while you are getting educated. So Punya, it's fascinating because
Yeah.
we have so
So
many.
if I can follow up to that question
Sure.
that Zhao asked, and I have sort of a little piece to add to that. So one is, can you give us a sense of what your role is in that community? And second, how that changed because of COVID-19. So you are in these different contexts, and clearly there is great diversity within that. So, apart from sort of recruitment, which you spoke about, what are the other aspects of the work that your organization does? And second, what changed because of COVID?
So our role in that community will range, obviously, as we just discussed, from recruiting individuals to education and training using online learning or access to our centers to do their courses via web conferencing or via the internet. But at the same time, we are working with organizations such as the business organizations in terms of saying to them, look, your human resources or your staffing in terms of their professional development, their growth, they need to be able to access courses and programs at a distance. And we can, in a way, work with you to be, if you like, part of your PD strategy. So that's a very different way of approaching it. We also have cases where the government has what they call social assistance agencies, and we will say to them, look, your job, Punya, as a social, let's say, a Ontario Works director, is to get as many of your clients to go from getting social assistance to getting into education so they can get off social assistance. So we become the partner where you refer them to us, and then we help them get the training and the education, and they go into jobs. So these are 3 examples, and there are many others in terms of how we link with those different.
So are you creating content and doing the instruction, or are you more of a mediator between different organizations and sort of bringing these different groups together?
You said it very well. We are a matchmaker. We do not get into the curriculum at all. And because if we did, we would be in a way to be competing with our 22 university partners, 24 college partners. But we do the 2 things, Punya. We give them feedback on the experience that those students are having with their curriculum, with their materials, with the way they are teaching, their instructional development, the learning process. But we are carefully the one who brings the students to them. We are the one who support the students locally, but we are not the ones teaching in any way whatsoever. Although for the professors and faculty who are using, let's say, web conferencing and so on, we provide them training as well on how to use Adobe Connect, how to use Zoom, etc.
Got it. Thank you. Chris, I know you've been waiting and I've been
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm glad that you did some follow-ons. So I want to shift the ground a little bit and talk about admissions. So as you know, a lot of universities, including many in the US, are very proud of keeping people out, essentially.
Right.
Their prestige comes from having a low percentage of people admitted, and the claim is that if they didn't have these high standards, the quality of what was happening would go down. And of course, in continuing education, we see that simply is not true. We see that when you have more open forms of admission and you say to people, if you can succeed, we'll give you a chance. And sure enough, a lot of them succeed. So I'm curious as you recruit people who've been marginalized often in society or who may not have had access to the kinds of pre-college educational experiences that would be ideal. What types of support do you need to provide, and how's the success rate at the end of the day?
Two good questions, which actually look back to what Tonya was asking me about COVID-19, but I'll explain that. That is, I wish we had more of our universities and colleges with an open admissions policy. The reality is that they do not have one. A couple of them are dabbling into it, but not in a way that say that Athabasca University does. And admissions means not only admissions in terms of you do not have to have a certain grades, a certain completion, a certain set of courses or diplomas or etc., but also that you can be admitted not just in September or in January, but every month of the year, the same way Athabasca University does have that. So we do not have that kind of a policy or trend in terms of open admissions. That being said, what is interesting though is all the universities and colleges, primarily through sometimes their continuing education department, are reaching out and wanting to somehow bring more students in from those disadvantaged areas. And they are in some ways putting on courses that are stepping stones to them getting into the full program. So there's a bit of an openness there, which I think is very useful. And to move back to what Punya was saying about COVID-19, we have seen every university of the 22 universities, 24 colleges in the last 4 months get into open admission because they wanted to keep their students somewhat attached to them while they were, if you like, under lockdown. So they would say, well, I'll offer this free course just to keep you attached to me. And so then when September comes, we can go on into the full paid for programs. So Chris, Kurt, and Punya, it's been wonderful to see COVID-19 making us become open.
So
that's fascinating.
Exactly, that's what I was just going to say. That's the silver lining that that this whole show is predicated upon, is the idea that despite the trauma, economic and everything, and medical trauma, that there are certain silver linings. That this is a classic, I think, a great example of one where universities now have to rethink their selection procedures and so on. That's fascinating.
I think about it. For the last 40 years, all of us around the table, we've been working so hard in trying to convince universities to get online. 40 years of trying to do that, COVID-19 did it in 4 months. The same way we've been trying to convince them to become more open. 40 years of trying to do that, COVID-19 said, well, you better keep them hooked with free courses, open courses. Boom, done in 4 months. There's an irony in all of this.
Funny how that works. Yes. Mississippi and Louisiana banned online learning till Katrina, right? Exactly. China restricted e-learning to certain universities until SARS, right?
Exactly.
Haiti didn't get an online university till the earthquake hit.
Precisely.
We react. We're reactive creatures, not proactive creatures.
Exactly.
But at least, the DC area didn't believe in blended learning till Snowmageddon. I mean, we interviewed faculty from the region. It's phenomenal what's happened in the past 6 months for the recognition within our field. Now we need to step it up, and you're one of the places that can help people understand what's possible and initiate new programs, new courses. So I want to talk at some point, or I want to have you talk a bit about the webinars that you're offering free, that any of our listeners, so we have something that Maxim can talk about that all of you can take part in for free. So I want to talk about that second, but first, by the way, Chris, if you had a follow-up question.
I have one follow-up, and then we can segue into the webinars.
Why don't you do that follow-up first? Go ahead.
So it's great that Canada has the insight to recognize that this isn't just education, this is economic development.
Yes.
And it is interesting to look at the model that many countries have for higher education, which is very much an industrial model of the economy that says, the universities and colleges train an elite, right, and then the elite is all that you need, really, to have a strong economy, because you've got all these sort of worker bees and underclass that doesn't need much of an education. And now, of course, in the global knowledge-based economy, that model is completely false. It never was a good model in terms of equity, but now it's not even a workable model in terms of economics. And so I think it's great that Canada is recognizing that bringing all the trapped intelligence and the lost human potential that's been part of these first generation and marginalized students to bear, to make their economy a strong one, and to keep these communities vital. Is there, where do you get these leaders? I'd like to import some leaders into the US that think that way.
Well, in a way, you're being perhaps a bit unfair to yourself in the US, because I do think, Chris and Kurt, you have been influencing us, because you've been here giving webinars. And, by the way, we'll get to the webinar part, but you've been giving us presentations and keynotes. Those have influenced us. Canada is a very odd place, and so is Ontario. Do you realize that Ontario is the world leader in terms of the level of participation in post-secondary education for people between 25 and 34? 68% of Ontarians have a post-secondary credential. Why it happened? Partly because of the college system that we have, those 24 colleges, where as soon as you finish high school, we can draw you into the system and support you too. That's partly. Second, I think it has been sometimes simply we've been lucky that we've had leaders. For example, Premier McGuinty was one of them, who was a premier a number of years ago, who said, we shall push to make absolutely sure that as many people can participate as possible, and we'll fund that. Premier Ford, who's our current premier, has been dogged in terms of saying, we want to make sure that the trades, people do participate, not just universities in the trades. So we have those very strong leaders who are very single-handedly pushing us. And whether we can export them is a different matter, but we've been lucky and blessed that way. Right now, we have an amazing, if you like, strategy being developed by the current government of Ontario to really go out in terms of the making every young person be able to get in as far as trades, university, and everything else. So that's, now with respect to the webinars, I mean, we've been lucky. We've been lucky because, by the way, we've offered dozens of webinars. One of them blew the enrollment totally up. And guess who offered it? Kurt Monk. So Kurt came in and set the standard which nobody else has reached so far. Kurt.
Thank you very much. It was fun to do, by the way.
Man, you have so many people participating, so dynamic. So we are going to continue to offer this cluster of free webinars, because we think that it's an opportunity for everyone to participate. Now, we have limited resources to do so, but we've been very fortunate, Chris and Kurt and Punya, that we've had a lot of collaboration from colleagues like you, colleagues in the US, colleagues in Canada, colleagues in Europe, and colleagues in South Africa as well in offering them.
You have Dr. Ron Osten from York University, former dean, doing sessions on Zoom. And if people want to learn about Zoom security or about Zoom pedagogy, he has more coming up. He's done about 6 or 7 of them. You have George Valencianos from Vancouver Island talking about the student perception of online learning and e-learning. Right. You have all sorts of Tony Bates coming from Vancouver with his
free book
on the digital learning, right? So amazing people in their webinar series. So do take a look at that. And that's under Contact North Teach or Teach Online. What's the name of it they should be looking for?
It's teachonline.ca. Teachonline.ca.
Okay, and it's at the Contact North website, and you can look on the right-hand side at the bottom. teachonline.ca. It's fabulous, and it's
And
great.
We're not going to let Chris get away with it because we're going to grab onto Chris pretty soon to give a webinar. So,
well, I thought that was part of the deal. Is that in exchange for getting you on this program, each of us co-hosts had to come do a webinar for Contact North.
Maybe we'll do all group one. You know.
Indeed. But Kurt, I mean, all of us. I mean, I think the way we all are marveling at the confluence of developments in terms of COVID-19, the response, which I think has been a good one in many ways by institutions in terms of finding ways moving forward. We have such an opportunity in terms of pedagogy, in terms of ways of delivering and so on. We haven't even scratched the surface yet.
So Scott's going to want to do a volunteer to webinar as well. He's handling the chat here. A question that came up a long time ago, back in the Stone Age, about 15 minutes ago, was what about teenagers? What about others? Is it Contact North solely for the adult learner, or is there any college prep, any advanced placement, anything like that that you offer to older teens? Or parents now? Are you offering anything for parents who are dealing with all ramping up for online learning? Is there any of that happening?
So let me answer all three. With respect to teenagers, we are more and more in certain areas of Ontario finding there are a lot of young Canadians who did not finish high school, who are in a non-urban area and who says, look, I'm working now in construction or in trades or whatever. I want to get and finish my high school, but I am going to go to a college and so on. So we are targeting that group, which is very important. Second, we also have in those First Nations communities that I mentioned about, we have a number of people who are, the literacy level is not as high as it could be. So we have a whole program called e-channel, which is targeting people as far as their literacy level, because they need that. So that part is, so we do help the young people at a high school level who have very specific kind of challenges. We don't go after every one of them, but those are very helpful. You mentioned about parents as far as how do you, if you like, support your kids now that they are going to be studying at home in some of them, because 30% of the parents in our school system have opted for this fall, which is next week, to actually have their students continue online. We're offering some webinars, and perhaps Kurt and Chris and Punya, you may have some ideas as to whom we could feature but we would like to be able to at least open the opportunity for them to hear from more people as to how to support their children as they are studying online. That's very difficult.
Thank you for that. Punya has questions, and Chris has, and we all have some. So let's start with Punya.
Sure. Lots of questions. So this one is actually coming from the YouTube chat. A couple of people, I'm combining a couple of questions here. So are curious about when you're working with Indigenous population at the tertiary level, how do you sort of connect with sort of still maintaining the sort of the individual cultures? And second, what is the financial model for the students, which is, do they have to pay the universities? Do they get some scholarships, or is there funding support? Because often that can be a big barrier as well. So one is sort of the cultural aspect, other is the financial aspect, both connected with issues of access and equity.
Terrific question, Punya. First, let me say that the support that Contact North provides is all free. In other words, the government gives us a block funding every year and say, you provide this service, you do not charge anyone. So that's one aspect. The second part is that when we go in those communities, we've noticed that there is an emerging pedagogy as far as the First Nations. One, for example, that in a way fascinating is that silence is not a bad thing in a conversation, in an open discussion. There is a kind of a different pace. You don't have to fill the silence quickly. You can take your time to reflect. And so that is actually coming through the pedagogy that we are seeing some of our college instructors and university instructors go. Thirdly, that is, there is a sense of, that is, we need to anchor whatever we are studying into their real experiences, the real challenges they are facing on the ground in their communities. So if you are studying sociology, it is not sociology just Durkheim and so on. It is looking at what does it mean as a group of people in a very challenged area. We do not play an active role there because that's curriculum, but we try to influence by bringing forward the experiences and the thoughts that those students have. And they can teach us. I can tell you, I've learned so much from the First Nations. There is a wisdom, there is a sense of nature, there is a sense of the other, which sometimes we are so quick and so frenetic that we don't quite get into that. And we should.
I had fun with the Cree Nation Community College near Edmonton a couple of weeks ago. Actually, I did 2 sessions with them. Wonderful. So yeah, and they're planning more as well. So real opportunities, and it's fun to reach out. Your job must be so much fun because you know you're making a difference. You know, your outreach and extension and education, you're doing exactly what people need.
Yes, it's a lot of fun. At times there are not frustrations, but we also need contact. Not in my view, the next part of the next phase is to become more focused and stronger advocates. Let me explain. That is, we are noticing, example, that a lot of people are first, if you like, generation learners. Their parents have never gone to university and so on. So we want to influence the policy that the government is implementing to say, how do you reach those people? Very different. How do you support them? Very different. So in that sense, we're having fun, but I want to get all of my staff to be a bit more, if you like, impatient, a bit more frustrated to say, there are some policy initiatives that we want to promote, in a positive way.
Chris has a couple of things for you.
Sure.
Yeah, so I loved the report on the new online pedagogy. And,
yes.
And in fact, I'm trying to live up to that pedagogy in my own teaching. But what struck me as a little ironic about it is that for those of us, like all of the co-hosts who've been in distance learning for a long time, this is not really a new pedagogy. It's where we've been going for a long time. But what happened was Moocs. And, a group of people who chose to ignore the whole history of distance learning came up with this model and an elaborate set of promises that said, we can use 1970s pedagogy and educate the world. And of course, the promises have proven to be empty by and large, and the pedagogies have not worked well.
Right.
And only now, I think, are universities starting to get past the kind of, but Moocs are the way to think about this, into more of the kind of new pedagogy that you're describing. So are you finding in the Canadian universities that faculty have figured out that in fact, it's not a matter of doing Moocs on steroids, it's a matter of doing this new pedagogy? And as the second part of the question, are the universities able to take this down to the schools, or are you able to take this down to the schools where you're saying, don't teach like Moocs in the schools, because then when they get to universities that have the new pedagogy, the students aren't going to be well prepared?
I am finding that it's spotty in the sense that you do definitely have some treasures happening in some specific institution or specific parts of the institution. When we say the faculty will say, look, and Ron Austin, who, as you know, is one of our leaders in online learning in Canada. I know at York, when he was there, he pushed very much within the Faculty of Education, other faculties where you had that. You had them moving, being ahead of us in terms of the the pedagogy. There is still a lot of, if you like, duplication of the old paradigm. It's a little bit like, if you like, we, rather than making a movie, we're just taping a theater play and putting it on. It's not quite the same. Now, moving on to Moocs, I have two perspectives on Moocs. I think Moocs has a huge potential if and when we are ready to prepare and to offer students challenge exams. In other words, if we can, in certain large courses, say, look, you can access it through a MOOC. When you finish, you can challenge the exams and show that you've learned that. Then I think there's a lot that can be done with that. But to be quite candid, Chris, there are a lot of initiatives happening in different institutions, at least in Ontario, in colleges. Sometimes it's not scaled, and that's another issue in online education. But there is not, if you like, a concerted policy, a concerted initiative yet. It's coming.
We've got a 3,200.
There's a movement.
And we've got a database of 3,200 MOOC instructors that we've been tapping into or mining for a series of researches on MOOC pedagogy and engagement and instructional design, cultural sensitivity, and you see motivation, you name it, we've been looking at it. So, and we did something for the Commonwealth of Learning that summarized the research. My former advisee, Maina Ju, and I have been, and many others have been tapping into that. And you're right that we have to improve the pedagogy, or nothing is going to be a failure. But the people we're interviewing, the faculty that we're interviewing, students we're interviewing, there are about 20 different things that we found that help for a self-directed learner, or help for self-directed learning, that can be embedded within the MOOC or integrated in, that can help in that regard. We need to do more. We need to make people more aware of it. But I think today we're finally making some inroads. Early on, it was just the drill and kill model, the shovelware stuff that was going on, right?
And there are interesting developments. It's a detail, but it's an important detail. You cannot find a learning designer, an instructional designer in Ontario to hire. They've all been hired. You can post, you can offer any kind of salary you want. They're done. Because some universities just hire them all. This is amazing. This is great.
I've heard. I actually know someone who interviewed with you guys, and she told me that my friend Crystal interviewed with you guys, and she's great. But you got so many opportunities for people today. It's hard to hire everybody that you need, right?
Which means that the institutions, for whatever reason, through COVID, forcing them to go online, said, we better hire the institutional designers just to make sure we know what we are doing. And now it's the golden age of instructional design in the world due to COVID-19.
Our audience out there, what Maxim is saying, come to Harvard, go to Arizona State, go to Indiana, Kansas, or Colorado to get a master's in instructional design. You will get a job, guaranteed. You will get a job.
And you will get an exciting job because you now have faculty, academic administrators who are very keen on supporting you, supporting them, and paying you well, by the way. So it's a great opportunity.
So I want to ask this question that Zhao had posted a little while ago.
Yes.
Since you've been doing this for a while and with the COVID-19 and so on, and as schools now are trying to figure out face-to-face versus online, versus half the students come in on one day, another half come in another day, and we sit social distancing. What lessons do you have that, with your experience with Contact North and Athabasca, that could be useful for schools or colleges or universities today?
One lesson is, Punya, is do not make a hard line between either it's online or it's remote learning. That's a false dichotomy. Example, we were asked by the Minister of Universities in Ontario to help a small university move all of its spring and summer programming courses online. And by the way, they did a super job, that particular university. What we did was to say to Professor X, look, you are used to giving a lecture, so give a lecture, but shorten the lecture. You are used to have a question and answer, make more question and answer, make it longer. So I think that if you approach it in saying, look, online means that you're going to shrink the one-way broadcasting aspect to it. You're going to increase the portion of it that is question and answers and the discussion. You find there is a bit of a momentum towards those professors who have zero experience in online education to move towards it, as opposed to saying, well, what you're doing is not online, it's campus-based, it's remote learning. Now let me teach you how you do online. So that's one lesson. The second one is that synchronous delivery is a very, very strong tool in getting them online. At least it's a way to have that synchronicity, same time, different place discussion. And a lot of academics and professors are finding that a good way to get into that part. And it has been quite useful. Those two lessons, in my view, have been for us phenomenal, if that helps.
So, yeah, no, that's great, because one of the things that came up in our previous last week's discussion, I think Zhao mentioned this, which is, we say online learning and face-to-face learning and remote. Actually, at the end of the day, it's all learning. And
Absolutely.
If we see it from that perspective, and we see what are the modalities which are best for what reason, and sort of create that model where each of these is, because one of the examples I always used to give is, imagine if all learning was online, and then we ask people, say, oh, you have to come into this room for 50 minutes, 3 times a week. And people are like, that is so stupid. Why do you want to do that? It's just a question of that we've gotten used to it. Now, this is not to say that face-to-face, like interaction is not important, that synchronous engagement is not important, but rather to think about learning in a wider sense and use all the modalities for their specific strengths, and use that in a jigsaw so that it really works well together. And I think what this has done is sort of push that conversation forward. I think the gut response was, let's just move everything to Zoom, which is, when you think about it, like whether for elementary school or for doctoral students and everything in between, is just the wrong way to go. Anyway, I know, Chris, I took off on a rant here, but Chris, I know you have a question coming up.
And I had one quick thing before Chris has a question, in fact, about Chris. That is, people like Chris and Kurt and you and others have taught us that, look, educational learning is also about setting up some very clear small objectives that the students know they can move from point A to point B to point C. I have never seen in my 40-year career so much attention being given by academic administrators because of remote learning, because of that fast scaling up, to say, how do we do that? How do we, for you guys, it's elementary stuff, but now there is a focus on that, which is very exciting. So say what, Chris? I jump in there.
No, fine. I want to look into the future for a minute. And our most recent face-to-face interaction was, I remember speaking at an event on AI in education that Contact North sponsored a couple years ago. As you imagine 3 years from now or 5 years from now, are there new kinds of technologies that you see beginning to make an impact on the services you provide and the services that your member universities provide?
There are at least 2 or 3, at least just my own sense of what I think the future holds in terms of opportunities. Remember, all of us, we are all educators. And education centers around one simple word: intervention. When to make an intervention, when to prod the student, when to help the student. And I think artificial intelligence, AI, and Chris, you are a leader in that in terms of reflecting on that, will enable us to have timely interventions, respecting privacy. We'll have to do that, that I think is going to change our ability to make sure that the student doesn't not get, perhaps so many students are non-starters in their learning, or they start and they just stop, or they start, they don't stop, but the first challenge they stop. So I think it will, the ability to have those timely interventions, thanks to technology, is going to have a huge impact in retention and in completion in terms of progressing that. That's one, in my view. I also think that in the large classes, there's no question about it, having those kinds of tutoring system as we had experienced in the United States, where they didn't know whether it was a machine or whether it was an actual person doing that. I think it's coming. I don't see we can escape that in my view. There's no, but the one thing that we haven't talked about much lately, it seems to me, it's the textbook. Chris, Kurt, Punya, I think the textbook is going to change, because we all know we have textbooks that can actually read you. They tell you what you, they monitor what you're reading and so on. That I think is the area also that we're going. So if you look at the interventions, thanks to AI, timely ones, using the textbook as a way to also read the student and be able to respond. These may not be very sexy ways of doing things like big technologies, but I think they're going to have a huge impact. Personally.
So I just want a quick follow up on that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yes, Kurt, is that okay? So one of the concerns that I sort of have at times is with the online and the sort of the corporatized, whatever the word, with the large, the Googles and the Facebooks and, those companies entering into the education market. One of the challenges is all this data that is being collected. I mean, if somebody is like dancing their way to the bank right now with COVID-19, it's all these companies who now have so much more data about each of us, because that's where our life is right now. And I'm just wondering about whether are there policies and stuff in place that Contact North works with or so on, that this data of the students, because that is, it's private personal stuff, but also is now there for the asking at some level. How is Canada or how is Contact North thinking about these issues? Because I don't think that we have had enough conversation about it. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't go online or do this, but that we need to understand what the lines are. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that.
I mentioned two or three quick things. One of them is that in Canada, the privacy or the data issue is coming in terms of COVID-19 through the question of online exam assessments, because a lot of the institutions are moving to giving their assessments online. So you have this online invigilation system, and students are very concerned that they are having to give so much information, because if Chris is going to take and be invigilated online, they have to know it is Chris, it is not Punya taking that particular course. So you have to give enough of information to say, yes, I am Chris and not Punya or not Kurt. So that I think is going to be, if you like, one of the wedges where the issue of privacy is, particularly this coming semester, is going to come to the fore. Thank God the institutions, at least in Ontario, are very thoughtful and are looking at ways not to mitigate that, but to make sure that there is enough information given to be able to identify the individual, but that information is not being used for other ways. That's the one. The second one is that, and perhaps this is me talking, and I have a bit of a, if you like, nonchalant view about the information aspect. To me, as long as it is aggregated, it is not Kurt's information or Punya's information or Max or Chris, it is pulled together in a way to give a trend to help provide a service. I'm less sensitive to that. But we all know we're on this virtual table that you can aggregate and you can use that to all kinds of ways. So that's where it becomes, we got to be very careful. But the exams is going to be where it's going to come to the fore this fall, I think.
There's a lot happening here. And, there's so much to keep track of. Can you give us a sense of what is your newest initiative that's got you excited, or partnership that's got you excited, and or what are you about to do next?
That's a big one. That is oddly enough, the newest initiative that gets me really excited is how we Contact North become a partner with the whole unemployment strategy and service that the government provides, and the whole on social assistance. So therefore, we become, if you like, there is a three-leg stool. There is people helping with social assistance, people helping with unemployment, and people helping with getting them to education. So we become that kind of a three-legged stool moving forward. That, I think, is exciting, right, in my view. It's not big thing, but it's really exciting in that. And the second one, Kurt, it has to do with the First Nations, with the Aboriginals. That is, I've noticed in the US or in Canada, COVID-19 has made us talk a lot about 5 groups. And in that sequence, we talk a lot about foreign students because they are a huge revenue. Then we talk about domestic students because, well, we got to look after the domestic students. Then we talk about visible minorities because the whole Black like me and so on, that becomes very important. Then we talk about special needs students, deaf students, everything else. And then lastly, we talk about Indigenous or First Nation students. You see the sequencing? And I'd like to kind of flip it a little bit, because the Indigenous, the First Nations are number 5 in terms of what's being talked about in the newspapers, or being talked about in academia, or being talked in universities and colleges as far as concerns with certain groups. That's my perception, by the way.
Fascinating. It must be exciting to be in meetings with you. I mean, when you were at Athabasca, you probably couldn't have imagined the people you've met at the last 25 years at Contact North, the influence that you've had, or your organization has had, the role that you were able to play within all this. And there are people who are going to be watching the recording who are hopeful that someday they'll be in a position like this.
And this is a good segue to something that is really preoccupying me the most, is that look at the demographics of the 5 of us or the 6 of us around this virtual table. Look at the demographics of Tony Bates, of Ron Austin. I would like to see a lot more care given to bringing the future Christidis, the future Punya Mishras, the future Kurt Bunk. It takes some deliberate effort to, if you like, nurture some young clusters of young people to make that happen. If we don't do that, folks, in 5 years, we won't have that new crop coming up.
One of our shows that was one of the most exciting was when we brought in youth, high school youth to the show and what they were doing, the projects they were working on and so forth. And to bring more females guests, we had guests from Africa. Chris brought some talking about the immersive learning that was happening there. And so we're reaching out to a wide variety. We need to do more, in fact.
And I'm also hoping that in a very kind of a, if you like, almost not democratic way, that the Chris Didis or the Kurt Brooks or the Punyas will pick on some young group and say, okay, there are 3 or 4 of you. I really would like to be helping you. You're my protégés, and grow them. Because if we did that, folks, we'll have a whole new generation.
That's a definite. Chris is going to jump in on that one.
Sure, Chris.
And I know that we're almost out of time, but people watching this may be saying, I would like a Contact North in my country. Not that you would do it, but that they might want to do it. Do you have advice for people who might want to take Contact North as a model, adapt it to their own region or country, and run with it? Do you have advice for them?
I have 3 very specific advice. It kind of come spontaneously. Number 1 is, first of all, target the rural and remote. Start there. Don't start with the urban one. If you want to replicate Contact North, that's where you start. That's one. Second, when you go in those communities, make it a three-part partnership. So tell the mayor of that city, you have to give me free space for a learning center. I'll bring the technology, I'll bring the staff. Don't go and rent space, because then it's not, they have no skin in the game in that sense. Do that. That's what we've done for 34 years. Now you get funny spaces, by the way, but that's okay. It's important. They have to put some skin in the game. And the third one really has to do, it's not the technology, folks, it's the people that you have who go out and recruit and support those disenfranchised and bring them in. And once you do those three things, I think you have, and we are helping actually, I can't be specific, but we are helping one other province in Canada to replicate Contact North. And we are working with a university and a country in Africa to help also replicate Contact North. So it's exciting. It's to me, we have a bright future as a sector. That is universities and so on.
That's a good way to end the show, but I have to pose one thing real quickly.
Sure.
I've read a lot about distance learning in Canada over the years. And I remember reading about holographic images being, displayed through video conferencing, to First Nation people on the outer, reaches of Ontario, where they didn't necessarily have roads, but they were sending holographic or 3D images of people. Is that happening? Is it really happening? Have you seen that?
It has happened, yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's but I guess the last comment I would make to conclude is that there is nothing as heartwarming when a student who has very little means in a remote community and who had never even imagined taking a course and so on, does do that and does move on to get a job and to move forward. It's one by one. It is not large, it's large scale, but it's the accumulation of the ones that makes it powerful.
We're just about at time, and I want to say that this has been a phenomenal show. And if you have friends that didn't attend this, and you have watched this and not shared the link to the show, you're doing a disservice to your friends. By all means, share the links to this show and get the word out what's happening in Contact North and what is possible in replicating it around the world.
And we are envious of this show, by the way. It's a super show. We are envious of it in Canada, by the way.
Oh, I forgot. We do need a sponsor. If Contact North would like to take that on, we do need a sponsor.
Let's talk.
My hand is trembling. And my brain excited nodes are firing, and I'm sure all the listeners out there, their brain is overwhelmed with action. There's a fluttering that's happening in my heart because I truly love what you're doing and what you represent. And it's too seldom that we meet, Maxim, and we have to do this more often. But yes. It's the vibrations in my soul that go off from hearing every single program and initiative and event that's happened at Contact North, because it is why I left the business world and came in to higher ed. Through distance learning, I took courses and now do it myself. So you're my role model, and you're all our role models. And it's a delight to have had you with us this week. And next week is a reflection week on what's happened. And I'm going to suggest we just cancel next week's reflection and bring Maxim in for part 2. Now,
it's a pleasure. And Kurt, we look forward to your next book, because every year you come up with one. So please don't stop. Help all of us.
Well, get Chris's news book is on the 60-year curriculum. So that's the one you want to pick up now.
Well done.
It's a definite. So thanks everyone, and come next week for our reflection on what's happened. And who knows, we might have someone pop in again at the spur of the moment. Thank you for coming this week to Silver Lining for Learning, episode 25. Next week, episode 26. Thank you all.
Bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Stay safe, please. Take care.
Thank you.